All right, there we go. Okay, so last week I demonstrated painting, and I'll do a little bit more, demonstrate a little bit more painting today. Now these colors here the colors are pretty clear in their difference, but the surfaces, these are not not great samples, but for some reason this paint, which should be in good condition, just isn't coming out as opaque as I would like it to be. But I'm going to get this here, put a little more. This one's a little cleaner. Let me try this. Oh yeah, see that seems really thin. I think I probably need to stir this up better. And so I'm going to get a skewer, kind of like that. Actually, I think this is like some chopsticks from some takeout I got a really long time ago. Stir that. So since liquids and solids tend to separate over time, and paint, water, and this color will be not all mixed together. Good. Okay, have some paper towels handy, or rags, like reusable, like I've got a lot of rags that are just cut up from old t-shirts and things like that. I tend not to buy much in the way of paper towels because I've got a bunch of shirts that are not being used anymore, and so I cut them up to rags, and it's pretty convenient and reduce the demand for disposable paper towels. Okay, now my brush is here, and that it's a little, that seems to pour a little more slowly. Okay. See if this, I don't know if there's really going to be any appreciable difference here. I just want to try this out. There, let's get this enlarged. So hopefully I think I can see this. It looks a little heavy, which is good, especially for this very light yellow. That's better. I think on Thursday I didn't mix it up well enough, because now, so I press, like I get paint on the brush and then I'll press a little bit to get it off the brush. And then at the end, lighter strokes across, go all the way across. Don't stop in the middle because you'll get a little low spot. Light. There. And you'll see texture. Don't try to brush all the texture away because you won't be able to without making it too thin. Okay, so there you can see that little bit of texture glistening there. Good. And now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to set my brush on my water container like that, so that it's just like resting on the edge but not sitting on a table surface. You should not be in the habit of just putting your brush down on your paper or the table, because you'll get paint in places you don't want it to go, And especially if you're working at home, that can be a real drag. Now I've wiped as much of the yellow off of this as I can get. Like there. And since this red is a significantly darker color than, oh yeah, that's, see, I didn't stir this well enough. You can feel it. There's much more resistance down at the bottom of this jar. Oh, there. Zoom back out so you can actually see what I'm doing. Good. Yeah. You know, some days when I do demos, some days my demos are better than others, and some days my demos are not. I'm sorry, because there's, you know, every time I do a demonstration, kind of relying on me to give you good information. I don't like the lost opportunity since we only spend a couple weeks on each of these projects. There's really no time for bad demos. All right. That I'm going to put over there on a rag. This, you will get a little paint on your hands. This is water soluble, waterproof. Actually, it's not waterproof, it's water soluble. This is a cup of a color I used to paint the pattern design last spring. And if I put a little bit of water on, like get the brush wet, that will reactivate. It's not always the best quality of paint, but sometimes, like if you have some paint and it dries up like this, and you think like, oh, I don't want to get rid of that because I might need it, you can just save it. Give your, just like save multiple cups. Small yogurt containers are good for this. I prefer, like these I've had for years. They just came with some set of like an art kit that we used to use at the old school, and they will work. They work quite well, and then you don't have to just keep throwing them away. But if you do eat something, if you regularly eat something like yogurt and you're constantly generating all these extra plastic cups, use those. Make sure you wash them out, of course. All right, so there's a little bit of red in there. Too much, I think. And then here's my yellow. And then you can watch the magic as I mix that. And see that little bit of red and this greater volume of yellow is very quickly getting it toward the yellow-orange. Now remember, when you're doing this, you want to make an array of choices for yourself rather than just mix this trying to hit the correct color. Because especially if you haven't done this before, how would you know which is the right color? The nice thing about making this, gradually mixing and getting it more and more orange until you get into the red-orange, and you can make a nice range from yellow to red. Here I can be more confident that I've got my colors. You also have to paint them and then wait for them to dry. Okay, so this, I think I've got that pretty thoroughly mixed. Make sure it's even on my brush, that's good. I'm going to scrape off one side. So that side, you can see the bristles. Let's try this down here. Good. Yeah, well, I think I can see. I just didn't do a good job mixing my colors, mixing my paint. It's too watery on the top, and more solid colorant was all the way at the bottom. That's really nice. Ooh, look at that. Pretty. You can see there's a little light bits where I didn't go all the way up to the top. If I go brush lightly, I have to move this. This is in my way. Let's make sure you you aren't limiting your range of motion by having things too crowded around you. Good, good. Oh, that's so much better. So, yeah, you might think it's a little bit elementary to have to learn how to paint, but you have to learn how to use this paint. This is not the same as, watercolor. This is the Chroma Opaque poster color is like a high quality tempera paint. Poster paint, I guess you could, there is such a thing as poster paint, which is when people used to actually paint poster advertisements. Some people still do. I remember grocery stores when I was a kid would have these huge banner sheets of paper, and the sale items and all that stuff was painted on the surface, and it was painted with this kind of paint. When I first started teaching, we were using gouache, which is opaque watercolor, which comes in tubes like this. And it's really nice paint. It's opaque watercolor, meaning that you can't see through it. Watercolor is normally meant to be transparent. I guess you're really more like it's translucent. And so you can make washes. You can make washes with watercolor, but if you try to make it solid, it'll when it dries, it'll crack. It's meant to be painted only a certain way. So gouache is a lot more expensive than this paint that you're using here. So at some point, oh gosh, long time ago, more than 15 years ago, I remember I was bothered by how much money the students had to pay, how much money you had to pay or spend on gouache, because it's expensive, and if you're new to painting, you're going to use up a lot of it and then have to go buy more. So I went out and tried different paints, and I found this stuff, and this stuff is really well suited to what we're doing because it does the job of allowing you to create opaque colors without costing so very much. I mean, a tube like this would probably cost twice as much as one of these bottles of paint, and would not last as long. Okay. Better, much better. Oh, this is so much better. Okay, good. So what you're going to be doing for next week, for Thursday's class, I want you to have your painting done. There will be some time to do a little more painting because you may come to class and say, I've been making gobs of these samples and a lot of them just don't look good. What am I doing wrong? And then I can tell you. It's a little easier to do that in person than it is online. Although if you showed me, I could probably solve that. That's not enough. So as you're adding paint, like I'm going from yellow to red, and so I'm going from a very light value hue to a dark value hue. Red is on the dark, sort of like on the dark end of the range of value. And so the darker I make this, the more orange it gets, the more red I have to add to create the same degree of change. When I was starting with yellow, it didn't take much red to get it to change. When I'm at orange, it takes more red to get it to change. So that's an effect of the value of the color, not the hue, and not the saturation. This is all high, this is all like this. The pure hue, which is what we got in the bottle of the primaries, is just, these are with pretty much full saturation, meaning there's no white, black, gray, or the complement mixed into them. Okay, oh, I hit that with a little, I think I hit that with the bottom of the cup. Let's see how this is here. That's better. Oh yeah, see, that is nice. So there is a fine line here between, you paint, you want to make sure these are solid so that you don't see the paper showing through. And you also want to make sure there's not too much texture. So you very lightly. It's hard to demonstrate this here, but the brush strokes right now are really light. I'm just kind of really what I'm doing is slightly spreading it a little bit more, but also these final brush strokes that go all the way across the sample are meant to even out the surface. Okay, so that's better. So what I'm getting here in terms of my my samples, I'm getting a much clearer and more solid example of each of the hues. So when I do the, when I cut them out, I can see there's a little bit of, you can see with this one, get that shadow out of here. This is a little bit lighter up here, but if I can cut out this, if I'm going to use a triangular shape, which, something that tapers like a triangular shape is good for the color wheel because you can have the smaller, the point in toward the center since you're making a wheel or a circle. So the wider part can be to the outside and the smaller, the point to the inside. That makes it easier for you to array those samples around a circle. We'll talk about format and ideas for what the color wheels are going to look like on Thursday. Okay, good. And that's good, that's good. Oh, I got all this orange paint. What am I going to do with it? So if I do have this paint, you can, if you have a need to save colors, you might not right now unless you're, well, you might not right now. When we do the other, the monochromatic and the complementary assignments, there will be more of a need for you to save colors that you mix, especially with the complementary pair, because one of these, if you're painting from the primaries, you have to create one of your two colors at least, So you need a container that you can seal. If I were to put plastic over this and put a rubber band around it or tape it, that would help to keep the air from making this dry out. Okay, then if I don't really need to be holding my brush anymore, I think you kind of hopefully you get the point of what we're doing here. When I started demonstrating, when I started teaching color 20 years ago, remember, the more I demonstrated, the more I really began to appreciate the beauty of color just by itself. And it started to help me to understand that certain kinds of abstraction in art that use just color, like color field painting or something like paintings by the Mark Rothko, they really are they're not a picture of anything. It's just this combination of colors. I began to appreciate it better because there's really something very beautiful about just a beautifully presented color. If I can paint this out nicely and just make this really nice, clear, flat color, that's done. So, if I can make this really clear, flat color, I can see the beauty. And even really appreciate this irregular edge that I get from the brushing. So one of the things to watch out for is brushing too much. So I just, this one was very efficient. I got it, and I stopped. I can see some texture here, but I'm going to trust this process can see, there you can see that texture with the light on it. If you trust the process, and I do, this will even out. You can even see these others are evening out, and you may already have seen this in your own work. Okay, so that is a recap of painting for the color wheel to get flat samples. You're going to need this technique in the next assignment, which is the monochromatic pattern. And for that, we'll talk about that, but it's actually not even until next week. So don't worry about that yet. But if this technique of making flat colors on the paper is useful. One reason is that we want it to be very clear which color it is. When they're thin and washy like this, it's not so decisive, and they don't, you know, like if we were doing this with watercolor, that would be one thing, because watercolor, you can't paint it solid like these guys. But we're not painting with watercolor. So the, you know, the one thing that this does, especially you'll see this in the monochromatic assignment, is that it makes the colors very clear. And that clarity is what you want. And this paint is matte finish so that when it dries and light hits it, it doesn't reflect light back to you, so you don't get glare. The matte finish scatters the light and absorbs it so that you don't get interference from reflection. Okay, so I'm going to just put my, you're done painting for the moment. Like if you're going to be done painting long enough that you need to put your brush down, and the paint might start to dry in it, just put it in the water. If you know, like here, if my next step is to go from yellow to green, yellow to blue, and getting the range of green, I need to go wash this out with soap and water. So what I would do is rinse this out the best I can, blot it. Here. There. Rinse this out, blot it, get all that off of there. There will be paint up just like here that kind of creeps up into the collar of the brush. What you need to do is put some soap, like dish soap, in the palm of your hand. Get this wet, and then just like swish it around and squeeze it. Just sort of press it down, and get more of the paint to come out of the middle of the brush. Then you can, rinse it. Maybe do that a couple of different times to make sure all the paint comes out. Because if I go from here, there's going to be a lot of red in my brush by the time I'm done painting this range of orange to red. When I go to do the next yellow, if I don't get all the red out of here, it's going to get into my yellow. And if there's enough of it, it will dull the colors, because you're painting yellow to blue, so you're painting the greens. Green is the complement of red, and so what you'll get is dull greens. Now, they'll still be, if they're still green, then that might be acceptable, but I want you to be careful because it matters. Sometimes there is no wiggle room and you cannot get some other color into your paint. And so you just have to be thorough and careful, take an extra few minutes, and very carefully wash your brush. I, as a young student, I was 17 when I started college, and I was, just have a late birthday. I was 17, 18 years old. I had no patience. I would just rush through things and then find that exactly what I'm talking about would happen to me, and then I would realize, oh, I can't really use that. And I just spent a bunch of time making something that I have to just chuck and do again. Okay, good. Now, one thing else I want to talk about, I'm going to get you your midterm. I'm going to have you take it in person. I'm going to print it. I want to show you I'm going to do is go over some of this and show you some examples of the, oh, there's the paper. What it looks like to make some of the drawings, what it looks like to make some of the drawings. For these questions. So I did move that vocabulary list of terms to, excuse me again, the current semester. And you can find that there's a vocabulary section now when you go to Blackboard on the left, that menu on the left side. And so let's go over what some of these might look like. Make sure I can see this and you. Okay. So let's say I ask you to define the term shape. Shape is a two-dimensional figure that's enough of an answer. Yes, you could also say it is flat. A flat figure in an image. And then show me a drawing that's a flat figure. And if I ask you to contrast that with form, that is a three-dimensional figure. In a three-dimensional figure, you could also say volumetric figure. A volumetric figure in an image. And you can compare it with the rectangle by giving it some depth. So you have height, width, but no depth. And here you have height, width, and depth, or this is also referred to as transverse in geometry. So that's a comparison. This right here is as much of an image as you would need to provide to make a drawing of form or a drawing of shape. And you can see there's a pretty big difference between the two. So I'm not going to go through every last one of them, but I do want to go through a few. Get you guys here. Give me some more space. let's say edge. What is an edge but the limit of a shape or form? And to draw that, I might say that is the edge, or you could say that's the edge. Something that lets me know that, this line defining the edge, the circle that's the edge. You can also have something that's more meandering geometric. Might be helpful if you draw the whole figure. Maybe try to define that with some shading. Edge. Okay. Contrast is a difference, any difference and this is very important. Difference is the key term in contrast. In value, hue, texture, and if you go beyond images, you could say that there's such a thing as contrast in sound. Any difference. And the difference doesn't have to be great. So if you say here is a circle and do this right here. I can create contrast and make that edge that line disappear and define the edge more clearly with contrast. I can also make it a little lower contrast by putting some shadow on that circle and start to turn it into a sphere. Why not continue and make my cast shadow? There. So this shading creates contrast on the edges. So this, what started out as just a flat drawing of a circle, turns into something that looks like a little three-dimensional picture. Like that. Okay. And let's say composition. That's a good one. Is the intentional arrangement, and here comes Elliot. All right, don't get into the paint, man. Intentional, in the way, arrangement of, let's say, elements or components in an image. Since this is a Design 1 and visual course, I would prefer that your definition and your drawing be related to images. I know I used the example of musical composition and sheet music. That was meant to give you some point of reference for something that more people might be familiar with. So composition. So the thing about compositions is that if you make an image, it's not an accident. You make everything you drew you did on purpose. That did not happen by accident. It's not necessarily the greatest composition. It's not bad. It's got some little like vortex going on there. But this is, I made choices. I made them quickly while I was doing this. I'm not worried about making a great picture. I just want to make a clear one that shows intention. So you need to have intentional, or there's got to be some intention involved with composition. Okay. Now let's see. And I'm going to send you a list of the terms that I will consider for this, and then you can forget about the rest of them, because there's some that I find I don't really talk about them that much, so I might just remove them eventually from this list. Let's try a couple more here. And then we'll end. Well, what is falling apart? Okay. Abstraction. Okay. Abstraction is a simplification simplification of shape and or form to a more basic or universal state. Okay, so let's say, for example, the example of the eye. You may understand that this drawing is meant to depict an eye, but nobody's eye looks like that. This is a symbol. And symbols are abstractions of more complex things. A house, that while there may be there is some architecture that's meant to look like this, like simple. Right. This is a great simplification of house. So if like a realistic eye is not really symmetrical, there's a tear duct. There are eyelids. edge of that eyelid there. The iris of the eye, which is that bigger colored part, usually is covered a little bit by the upper lid. And if you don't, if you don't include that drawing an eye, then it looks very like oddly staring like this one. So this one is still a simplification, but it's a more realistic representation of the eye. Okay, good. That's abstraction. And let's do another composition. Focal point. Okay, that is the place or area in an image that the viewer is most compellingly drawn to. Or that's, I guess the image to which, let's try to make this grammatically correct. To which the viewer is most compellingly drawn. Period. There we go. Mrs. Barnes would be happy. Good. So focal point. All images don't have to have a focal point. Some intentionally resist having a focal point. And here, but if I say like, I've got this here and I can arrange this image so that your eye follows these curves. And if you put in a nice long curve like that, the viewer will follow that curve. And then there's a square right there. It's really hard to miss that as a point of emphasis in the picture. So focal point creates a point of visual emphasis and compositional emphasis. Linear perspective with a vanishing point and these edges that recede very compellingly to a point in the distance. You could use the vanishing point in a perspective drawing to produce something like help you with that focal point. So a vanishing point and a focal point aren't really the same thing, although here, these are receding. There we go. So everything is coming down to this point here. Okay. Good. All right. So study your terms. If you don't do well, then I'll give you a chance to do it again. But first, you got to try to do the first one. Okay. Okay. Any questions?